The sun had barely cracked the horizon when Finn Everett pushed open the door to Jackson's bakery, the scent of rising dough and cinnamon already thick in the morning air. And though he had ridden through worse storms and faced down meaner men than most would ever know, nothing had prepared him for the way his breath caught when Fiona Jackson looked up from kneading bread and smiled at him that first spring morning in 1878. Hangtown, California had earned its grim name decades before, when justice came swift and final at the end of a rope. But by the time Finn arrived, the mining town had settled into something resembling civilization. The gold rush had long since cooled to a simmer, leaving behind a town that clung to the Sierra Nevada foothills with determined permanence. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their false fronts reaching toward the sky as if trying to convince passing travelers that Hangtown was more than it appeared. The bakery sat between the general store and the telegraph office, a modest structure with whitewashed walls and windows that glowed warm even before dawn. Finn had come to California chasing work, not romance. At 26, he had spent the better part of a decade moving cattle across the territories, sleeping under stars more often than roofs, and believing that the loneliness that settled into his bones was simply the price of the life he had chosen. He had taken a job at the Morrison Ranch, 5 miles outside Hangtown, managing a herd that had grown too large for old Samuel Morrison to handle alone. The work was honest and the pay was fair, and Finn had been content enough until he rode into town that April morning to pick up supplies and found himself standing in a bakery, staring at a woman who looked at him like he was a person worth knowing. "You are up early," Fiona said, dusting flour from her hands onto her apron. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, but wisps had escaped to frame her face, and her eyes were the color of the sky just before full dawn, that particular shade of blue that poets wrote about and cowboys pretended not to notice. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with capable hands and a directness in her gaze that suggested she had learned early not to waste time on frivolous things. "Cattle do not care much for sleeping in," Finn replied, removing his hat. His own dark hair was flattened from the ride, and he was suddenly aware of the dust on his clothes, the wear in his boots. "I was hoping to get some bread for the week, if you have any ready." "I always have bread ready," Fiona said, and there was pride in her voice that made Finn want to know the story behind it. "My father and we open before the miners head to their claims. They need something to carry them through the day." She moved to the shelves behind the counter, where loaves wrapped in clean cloth waited in neat rows. As she reached up, Finn noticed the way her sleeve pulled back to reveal a burned scar on her forearm, the kind that came from years of working near hot ovens. It was a mark of dedication, of a life built around labor and skill. "How many do you need?" she asked. "Just one, I suppose," Finn said. "Though I have to admit it smells better in here than anywhere I have been in months." Fiona turned back to him, and for a moment something flickered in her expression, pleasure mixed with wariness, as if compliments were both wanted and suspect. "That is the cinnamon rolls," she said. "They will be ready in about 20 minutes if you wanted to wait." Finn had no reason to wait. The supplies he needed were already loaded on his horse, and Samuel would be expecting him back at the ranch. But there was something about the warm light in the bakery, the way Fiona moved through the space with easy confidence, that made him want to stay. "I could wait," he said. Those 20 minutes stretched into 30, then 40, as they talked. Finn learned that Fiona had been born in Hangtown, that her mother had died when she was 12, and that she had been running the bakery alongside her father ever since. Her father, Henry Jackson, had been a baker in Sacramento before following the gold rush east into the foothills, though he had been smart enough to realize that feeding minors was more profitable than becoming one. When Fiona spoke about the bakery, her whole demeanor changed. The wariness melted away, replaced by genuine passion. "People need bread," she said simply. "No matter what else is happening in the world, no matter how hard times get, people need to eat. There is something honest about that." Finn found himself nodding. "I feel the same about cattle," he admitted. "People need beef. The work might not be glamorous, but it matters." When he finally left the bakery that morning, carrying both a loaf of bread and a cinnamon roll wrapped in paper, he found himself thinking about blue eyes and flour dust all the way back to the ranch. He told himself it was foolish, that he had no business entertaining thoughts about a woman he had just met. But when dawn broke the next morning, he saddled his horse and rode into town again. The pattern established itself quickly. Every morning before the sun fully rose, Finn would ride to Hangtown and buy bread from Fiona. Some days he bought a single loaf. Other days he claimed he needed extra for the ranch hands, though Samuel had given him a curious look when Finn showed up with enough bread to feed twice their number. They would talk while Fiona worked, her hands never still, always kneading dough or checking the ovens or glazing pastries. Finn learned that she loved the early mornings best, when the world was quiet and the day held nothing but possibility. He told her about life on the trail, about sleeping under stars so bright and numerous they seemed impossible, about the way cattle could sense a storm coming hours before any human noticed the weather changing. "You miss it?" Fiona asked one morning in May, after Finn had finished a story about driving cattle through a late spring snowstorm in Montana. "The traveling, I mean. Being tied to a ranch must feel confining after all that freedom." Finn considered the question carefully. A month ago, he might have said yes without hesitation, but something had shifted in him since arriving in Hangtown, since walking into this bakery and finding reasons to return every morning. "I thought I would," he said honestly. "But there is something to be said for knowing where you will sleep each night, for having a place that starts to feel like home." Fiona's hands stilled in the dough she was kneading just for a moment before resuming their rhythmic work. "Hangtown is not much of a home," she said. "It is a town people pass through, not a place they stay." "You stayed," Finn pointed out. "I did not have much choice," Fiona replied, but there was no bitterness in her voice. "My father needed help with the bakery, and someone has to keep feeding this town." "That is still a choice," Finn said gently. "You could have sold the bakery, moved to San Francisco or Sacramento, done something else." Fiona looked at him then, really looked at him, and Finn felt the weight of her assessment. "I love this bakery," she said finally. "It might not make sense to someone who has spent his life moving from place to place, but this is mine. My mother helped build it. I have put my own sweat and burns into every inch of it. Why would I leave the thing I love?" The question hung in the air between them, and Finn found he had no answer. Or rather, he had too many answers, none of which he was ready to speak aloud. By June, the entire town had noticed Finn's daily visits to the bakery. Samuel Morrison had stopped pretending to believe that they needed quite so much bread, and had started giving Finn knowing looks when he rode out each morning. The other ranch hands had begun to tease him about it, good-natured, ribbing about the cowboy who had been lassoed by a baker's daughter. Finn took it all in stride, because he could not deny the truth of it. He was completely caught by Fiona Jackson, by her strong hands and direct gaze, by the way she spoke about bread with the same reverence he felt for a good horse or an open sky. But he was also aware that Fiona had not given him any clear indication that she returned his feelings. She was friendly, yes, and seemed to enjoy their morning conversations. But she was friendly with all her customers, professional and warm in equal measure. Finn had seen her laugh with old Mr. Peterson when he came in for his weekly sourdough, had watched her slip extra rolls to the widow Martinez and refuse payment. Fiona Jackson had a generous heart, and Finn could not tell if what she offered him was anything more than what she offered everyone else. It was Henry Jackson who finally forced the issue. Finn had never officially met Fiona's father, though he had seen the older man in the bakery's back room a few times, working at the large oven or hauling sacks of flour. Henry was in his late 50s, with the thick forearms of a man who had spent his life kneading dough and sharp eyes that missed nothing. One morning in mid-June, when Finn arrived at his usual time, Henry was standing behind the counter instead of Fiona. "She is upstairs," Henry said before Finn could ask, "feeling poorly, nothing serious, just tired." Finn felt a stab of concern. "Is there anything I can do?" Henry studied him for a long moment. "You could tell me what your intentions are," he said bluntly. "You have been coming here every morning for 2 months. You buy enough bread to feed an army, and my daughter smiles more than she has in years. So I am asking you straight, Cowboy. What are you after?" Finn met Henry's gaze directly. He had been raised to respect fathers and speak truth to them. "I am after your daughter's company," he said. "If she is willing to give it. I enjoy talking with her. She is intelligent and passionate and kind. If you are asking whether I have honorable intentions, the answer is yes. But I have not spoken to Fiona about any of this, because I do not want to presume that she feels the same way." Henry's expression softened slightly. "You really think she lets just anyone stand around her bakery for an hour every morning? You think she saves the best cinnamon rolls for every customer?" He shook his head. "My daughter is careful with her heart, and she has reason to be, but she likes you, Cowboy. Anyone with eyes can see it. The question is what you are going to do about it." Finn felt his own heart hammering in his chest. "What would you advise?" "I would advise being honest with her," Henry said. "Fiona does not have patience for games or pretty words that do not mean anything. If you care about her, tell her. If you are just passing through and looking for pleasant company until something better comes along, then stop wasting her time." "I am not passing through," Finn said firmly. "I have a job at the Morrison Ranch. I plan to stay in Hangtown." "Plans change," Henry said. "Men get restless. The road calls." "Not this time," Finn replied. "I am done with drifting. I want to build something real, something that lasts. And I would like Fiona to be part of that if she will have me." Henry nodded slowly. "Then tell her that, not me." When Fiona returned to the bakery the next morning, looking pale but determined, Finn made himself wait until the early rush had passed. He helped her carry sacks of flour from the storage room, ignored her protests that she was fine. And finally, when the bakery was empty and the sun was fully up, he spoke. "Your father and I had a conversation yesterday," he said, Fiona's hand stilled on the bowl she was cleaning. "I can imagine what about, can you?" Finn asked, "because I do not want to assume." She turned to face him, and there was color in her cheeks now, though whether from embarrassment or something else, Finn could not tell. "You have been coming here every morning for months," she said. "You do not need that much bread. So either you are terrible at planning meals, or you are coming here for some other reason. I assumed it was the latter, but I have been wrong about men before, so I did not want to say anything." The vulnerability in that admission made Finn's chest ache. "You were not wrong," he said. "I come here because I want to see you, because talking to you is the best part of my day. Because when I think about my future now, you are in it, and that is something I never expected to feel about anyone." Fiona drew in a sharp breath. "That is a lot to put on someone you have only known a few months." "I know," Finn said. And I do not expect you to feel the same way, not yet, but I wanted you to know where I stand. I am not passing through Hangtown. I am not looking for a brief distraction. I am here, and I am not going anywhere, and if you are willing to let me, I would like to court you properly." The silence stretched between them, and Finn felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He had faced down stampeding cattle with less fear than he felt in this moment, waiting for Fiona Jackson to decide his fate. "I would like that," Fiona said finally, and her voice was soft but sure. "I have been hoping you would ask." The relief that flooded through Finn was so intense he nearly laughed. Instead, he reached out and took her flour-dusted hand in his. "Then I am asking, may I call on you, Miss Jackson? May I take you to dinner, or for a walk, or whatever it is that courting couples do in Hangtown?" "You may," Fiona said, and when she smiled at him, Finn felt as if he had won something more valuable than all the gold in California's hills. Their courtship unfolded through the long, hot summer. Hangtown baked under the relentless sun, and the work at the ranch intensified as the cattle needed to be moved to higher grazing lands, and the hay needed to be brought in. But no matter how tired Finn was, no matter how early he had to rise or how late he worked, he made time for Fiona. They walked together in the evenings when the worst of the heat had passed, and the town settled into twilight quiet. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, the small details of daily life that became meaningful when shared with someone who truly listened. Finn learned that Fiona had once wanted to be a teacher, that she loved reading and had worked her way through every book in Hangtown's small library. He bought her a novel from a traveling merchant, a leather-bound copy of Jane Eyre, and the joy on her face when he presented it to her was worth twice the price he had paid. Fiona learned that Finn had been born in Texas, that his parents had died when he was 16, leaving him to make his own way in the world. She learned that he was quiet not because he had nothing to say, but because he preferred to think before speaking, to be certain his words carried weight. "You are different from the other cowboys who pass through," Fiona told him one evening in July. They were sitting on the porch behind the bakery, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Most of them are loud and rough, always trying to prove how tough they are." "I have done my share of proving," Finn said. "When you are young, you think that is what matters, but I am tired of proving things. I would rather just live well and let that speak for itself." Fiona leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that still made Finn's breath catch every time she did it. "I am glad you came to Hangtown," she said quietly. "I had started to think that this was all there would be. The bakery, my father, the same routines day after day. Not that I did not love it, but I had stopped expecting anything to change." "Everything changes," Finn said, "whether we want it to or not. The question is whether the change is something we choose or something that happens to us." "And you chose this?" Fiona asked. "Chose me?" "Every day," Finn replied, and meant it with his whole heart. By August, the entire town had accepted them as a couple. They attended the summer social together, dancing to fiddle music while miners and ranchers clapped along. Fiona wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, and Finn had spent an hour cleaning the dust from his best clothes, wanting to look worthy of standing beside her. They shared a basket lunch on Sundays after church, sitting under the oak trees at the edge of town and talking until the shadows grew long. Fiona introduced Finn to her father's friends, the other shopkeepers and business owners who formed the backbone of Hangtown's economy. Henry Jackson had clearly given his approval of the match, and that approval carried weight in the community. But as summer stretched toward fall, Finn became aware of a complication he had not fully considered. The Morrison ranch where he worked was not his own. He was a hired hand, paid fair wages but building no equity, no future he could call his own. Samuel Morrison was a good man and a fair employer, but he had sons who would inherit the ranch eventually. Finn's position, no matter how valued, was ultimately temporary. The realization gnawed at him. He had told Fiona he was staying in Hangtown, had promised her that he was building something real. But what was he building exactly? He lived in the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands, owned little more than his horse, his saddle, and the clothes on his back. How could he ask Fiona to marry him when he had so little to offer? She had the bakery, a business that provided steady income and was respected throughout the town. What did he have to match that? The question haunted him through September, as the heat finally broke and the leaves began to turn gold in the high country. He worked harder than ever, saving every penny he could, but the math was discouraging. At his current rate of savings, it would take years to accumulate enough money to buy land, to establish himself as more than just another drifting cowboy. It was Fiona who noticed his preoccupation. They were sitting in the bakery one morning in early October, the first real chill of autumn in the air, when she set down the cup of coffee she had been nursing and looked at him directly. "What is wrong?" she asked. "And do not tell me nothing. You have been distant for weeks." Finn sighed. He had never been good at hiding his feelings from her. "I have been thinking about the future," he admitted. "About what I can offer you." Fiona frowned. "What you can offer me? What does that mean?" "It means I am a cowboy working for wages," Finn said. "I do not own land. I do not have a business or prospects beyond the next season's work. You have the bakery, you have stability. What do I have to bring to a marriage except a horse and some saved wages?" The silence that followed was heavy. When Fiona finally spoke, her voice was tight with controlled emotion. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Finn looked up sharply. "I am trying to explain why I have not asked yet, why I cannot ask until I have something real to offer." "Something real," Fiona repeated. "And apparently my opinion on what is real does not matter." "That is not what I meant," Finn started, but Fiona held up a hand. "Let me tell you something, Finn Everett. I did not fall in love with your bank account or your property. I fell in love with a man who shows up every morning before dawn because he wants to see me. A man who listens when I talk about bread like it is the most fascinating subject in the world. A man who is honest and kind and steady. That is what is real, not money or land or whatever else you think you need to be worthy." "I do want to marry you," Finn said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I have wanted anything in my life. But I want to be able to take care of you properly. I want to be your partner, not your burden." "Then be my partner," Fiona said. "Not someday when you think you have proven yourself enough, but now. Work with me, not for me. We could build something together." "What do you mean?" Finn asked. Fiona leaned forward, her eyes bright with sudden excitement. "The bakery does well, but it could do better. My father is getting older. He talks about wanting to step back to let me take over fully. But the truth is, I cannot run the bakery alone and expand it at the same time. I need help. Not just someone to carry flour sacks, but a real partner who understands business and work." "I do not know anything about baking," Finn said. "You do not need to," Fiona replied. "But you know about managing people and resources. You know about planning and logistics. The Morrison Ranch is a business just like the bakery is. The skills are not so different, and besides, you could learn the baking part, if you wanted to." Finn stared at her, the idea taking shape in his mind. It was not what he had imagined for himself, not the vision of cattle and open range that had sustained him through years of drifting. But as he looked at Fiona, at the hope and determination in her face, he realized that his dreams had been changing for months without him fully acknowledging it. The future he wanted was not about open sky and endless horizons anymore. It was about this woman, this town, this life they could build together. "You are serious," he said. "You want me to leave the ranch and work at the bakery." "I want you to join me in the bakery," Fiona corrected. "As a partner, as my husband if you are finally ready to ask properly." Finn felt a smile spreading across his face, the first real smile he had managed in weeks. "Miss Jackson, are you proposing to me?" "I am suggesting a business arrangement," Fiona said, but her own smile gave her away. "What you do with that suggestion is up to you." Finn stood up, moved around the counter, and took both of Fiona's hands in his. "Then let me be clear. I love you, Fiona Jackson. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you here in Hangtown. If that life includes bread and early mornings and learning to tell the difference between risen dough and collapsed dough, then that is what I will learn. I do not need open range if I have you." Fiona's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Is that a yes to the bakery or a proposal?" "It is both," Finn said. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Fiona breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." When Finn kissed her there in the bakery, surrounded by the scent of bread and cinnamon and the life they would share, he felt something settle in his chest that he had not even known was restless. This was where he belonged. Not on a trail or in a bunkhouse, but here, with this woman who saw him not as a drifter or a cowboy, but as a partner, as someone worthy of building a future with. They announced their engagement that evening, and Hangtown celebrated with the kind of enthusiasm small towns reserve for good news. Henry Jackson clapped Finn on the back so hard he nearly knocked him over, then pulled him into a bear hug and welcomed him to the family. The other ranchers and miners who had watched Finn's courtship of Fiona with interest now offered congratulations and advice, some of it useful, most of it not. Samuel Morrison had been initially disappointed to lose his best ranch hand, but when Finn explained the situation, the old rancher had softened. "A man follows his heart," Samuel said, "and your heart is with that baker's daughter. I cannot fault you for that. Though I will say, I never expected to see Finn Everett trading a horse for a rolling pin." "I am keeping the horse," Finn said, and Samuel laughed. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Finn gave notice at the ranch, worked his final weeks with diligence, and spent his evenings at the bakery, beginning his education in the art and science of bread making. Fiona proved to be a patient but exacting teacher. She showed him how to judge dough by feel, when to add more flour and when to let it rest, how to read the heat of the oven by the color of the coals. Finn, who had spent years reading the mood of cattle and the threat of weather, found himself learning a new language of yeast and gluten and steam. It was harder than he had expected. His hands, used to rope and reins, struggled with the delicate work of shaping pastries. He burned his first 3 loaves, forgot to add salt to his 4th, and produced a batch of rolls so dense they could have been used as projectiles. But Fiona never lost patience with him, and Henry proved to be a valuable ally, offering tips and encouragement when Finn grew frustrated. "I learned this trade over decades," Henry said one evening, watching Finn wrestle with a particularly stubborn batch of sourdough starter. "You cannot expect to master it in weeks, but you are learning, and that is what matters. Besides, Fiona did not fall in love with you because she needed another baker. She has me for that. She fell in love with you because of who you are. The baking is just something you do." "I want to be good at it," Finn admitted. "I want to be worthy of this partnership." "Then keep showing up," Henry said simply. "Keep working, keep learning. That is all anyone can ask." They were married in November as the first storms of winter began to roll in from the Pacific. The ceremony was held in Hangtown's small church, with the entire town in attendance. Fiona wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and Finn wore a new suit purchased from the general store. Henry walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming unashamedly down his face, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Finn kissed Fiona to the sound of cheering and applause. The reception was held in the town hall, with food contributed by every family in Hangtown. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts, and Finn found himself overwhelmed by the sense of community, by the way these people had welcomed him and made him one of their own. He was no longer a drifting cowboy. He was Finn Everett, husband to Fiona, partner in Jackson's bakery and citizen of Hangtown. As winter deepened, Finn settled fully into his new life. He and Fiona lived in the apartment above the bakery, the same rooms where Fiona had grown up. They woke each morning in darkness, their breath fogging in the cold air, and made their way downstairs to begin the day's baking. Finn learned the rhythm of the work, the way each day followed a predictable pattern that was somehow never boring. There was comfort in the routine, in the knowledge that the bread they made would feed the town, that their labor had purpose and meaning. But Finn also brought his own ideas to the bakery. He noticed that many of the miners who worked claims in the higher elevations had no access to fresh bread, and suggested they start making hardtack and other preserved foods that could survive the journey and last through a week of work. Fiona embraced the idea, and soon they were supplying provisions to mining camps throughout the region. Finn also streamlined the bakery's bookkeeping, applying the organizational skills he had learned managing ranch operations to tracking inventory and sales. The partnership worked. Fiona handled the actual baking, drawing on years of experience and her mother's recipes, while Finn managed the business side and continued to learn the craft. Henry, relieved of much of the physical labor, was able to step back and enjoy a semi-retirement, though he still came down most mornings to supervise and offer advice. But the real success was in the marriage itself. Finn had worried during the engagement that working together so closely might strain their relationship. He had heard stories of couples who could not separate business from personal life, who let the stress of work destroy what they had built together. But with Fiona, the opposite proved true. Working beside her every day, learning to anticipate her needs and coordinate their efforts, only deepened his love for her. He saw her at her most tired, most frustrated, most triumphant, and loved her more with each revelation. Fiona, for her part, seemed to blossom in their marriage. The careful wariness that had characterized her when Finn first met her melted away, replaced by an openness and joy that made his heart ache. She laughed more, sang while she worked, and looked at him sometimes with such undisguised affection that he had to stop what he was doing and kiss her, flour, dust, and all. The first real test of their partnership came in late December, when a severe storm rolled through the Sierra Nevada. Snow fell for 3 days straight, drifting as high as the bakery windows and cutting Hangtown off from the outside world. The miners were trapped in town, unable to return to their claims, and supplies began to run low. Finn and Fiona worked around the clock, rationing flour and improvising with what ingredients they had, ensuring that everyone in town had at least bread to eat. On the 3rd day of the storm, when they were down to their last sack of flour and Finn was beginning to worry that they would have to turn people away, the weather finally broke. The supply wagon from Sacramento made it through the following day, and Hangtown slowly returned to normal. But the experience had cemented Finn and Fiona's reputation in the town. They were not just the bakers anymore. They were the people who made sure no one went hungry, who put the community's needs above their own comfort. By January, Finn had been in Hangtown for nearly a year, and it felt as if he had lived there his entire life. The restlessness that had driven him from town to town for so many years had vanished completely. He did not miss the trail, did not long for open sky and endless horizons. Everything he needed was here. A wife he loved more than he had known it was possible to love someone, work that challenged and satisfied him, and a community that had become family. One evening in late January, as they were closing the bakery for the night, Fiona turned to Finn with an expression he had learned to recognize. It was the look she got when she was working up the courage to say something important. "What is on your mind?" he asked, setting down the broom he had been using to sweep flour from the floor. "I have been thinking," Fiona said, "about the bakery and the future." "Good thoughts or worrying thoughts?" Finn asked. "A bit of both," Fiona admitted. She moved to lean against the counter, and Finn joined her there, close enough that their shoulders touched. "The bakery is doing well. Better than it ever has, honestly. Your ideas about expanding to the mining camps have brought in more business than my father and I could handle alone. We have steady customers, a good reputation, and enough saved that we do not have to worry about lean times." "That sounds like good thoughts," Finn observed. "It is," Fiona agreed. "But I have been thinking about what comes next. My father is getting older. He wants to retire fully, to spend his days fishing and reading instead of waking before dawn to knead dough. And I do not want to keep him working just because we need the help." "We could hire someone," Finn suggested. "There are plenty of people in Hangtown who would appreciate steady work." "We could," Fiona said. "But I have another idea. What if we expanded the bakery, made it bigger, hired multiple people, turned it into something that could run even when we are not there every single day?" Finn felt excitement stirring in his chest. "What did you have in mind?" "Right now, we are limited by space," Fiona explained. "We have 2 ovens and a single workspace. That means we can only bake so many loaves at a time. But if we expanded into the building next door, the one that used to be a dry goods store before it went out of business, we could double our capacity. We could hire people to help with the baking, maybe even start making more specialized items. Cakes for weddings, pastries for the hotel. We could supply every restaurant and boarding house in town." "That is ambitious," Finn said, but he was already turning the idea over in his mind, examining it from all angles. "It would take significant investment. We would need to buy the building, install new ovens, hire and train staff." "I know," Fiona said, "and it is a risk, but I think it is a risk worth taking. You said once that you wanted to build something real, something that lasts. This could be that. A bakery that outlives us, that becomes part of Hangtown's foundation." Finn looked at his wife, at the determination and hope in her face, and felt a surge of love so intense it nearly took his breath away. This was what he had been looking for all those years on the trail, though he had not known it. Not empty horizon, but purpose. Not freedom, but partnership. Not endless possibility, but the chance to build something meaningful with someone he loved. "Then let's do it," he said. "Let's buy that building and expand the bakery. Let's build something that lasts." Fiona's face lit up with joy. "You really mean it?" "I have never been more certain of anything," Finn replied. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close in the warm, flower-scented air of the bakery. "We are partners, Fiona. In everything. If this is what you want, then it is what I want too." The next months were consumed with planning and preparation. Finn and Fiona met with the owner of the defunct dry goods store and negotiated a purchase price. They consulted with a carpenter from Sacramento about renovations, drew up plans for new ovens and expanded workspace, and interviewed potential employees. Henry Jackson, energized by the project despite his expressed desire to retire, threw himself into advising and supporting them. The work was exhausting and stressful. There were permits to obtain, materials to source, and a dozen unforeseen complications. The first carpenter they hired proved unreliable, and they had to start over with someone new. One of the ovens they ordered was damaged in transit and had to be sent back. And through it all, they still had to run the existing bakery, still had to wake before dawn and bake bread for Hangtown citizens. But Finn found that he thrived on the challenge. He was using skills he had honed over years of ranch management, applying them to a completely different context. He coordinated with suppliers, managed timelines, and solved problems as they arose. And he did it all alongside Fiona, their partnership deepening with every decision they made together. By early spring, the renovations were complete. The expanded bakery stretched across 2 buildings now, with 4 ovens, multiple workstations, and enough space for a small staff. They had hired 2 experienced bakers from Sacramento, along with 3 local women who were eager to learn the trade. Fiona spent weeks training them, passing on the knowledge her mother had given her and she had given Finn. The grand reopening was held in April, exactly 1 year after Finn had first walked into Jackson's bakery and met the woman who would change his life. The entire town turned out for the celebration, eager to see what Finn and Fiona had built. They offered samples of new pastries, gave tours of the expanded facility, and accepted congratulations and well wishes. But the moment Finn remembered most clearly came later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the bakery was quiet again. He and Fiona stood together in the new space, surrounded by gleaming equipment and the lingering scent of sugar and butter, and Fiona turned to him with tears in her eyes. "We did it," she said softly. "We really did it." "You did it," Finn corrected. "This was your vision, I just helped." "No," Fiona said firmly. "We did this together. I could never have managed this alone. You made it possible." Finn pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Then I guess we make a good team." "The best team," Fiona agreed. As spring turned to summer, the expanded bakery proved to be everything they had hoped for and more. The increased capacity allowed them to take on new contracts, supplying bread and pastries to businesses throughout Hangtown and the surrounding area. The additional staff meant that Finn and Fiona could occasionally take a day off, could have dinner at the hotel or take a Sunday afternoon to ride up into the hills and enjoy the wildflowers that blanketed the high meadows. They also found time to plan for a future that extended beyond the bakery. One evening in June, as they sat on the porch behind the bakery watching the sunset paint the sky gold and crimson, Fiona placed a hand on her stomach and said, "I have been thinking about names." Finn looked at her in confusion. "Names for what?" "For the baby," Fiona said, and watched as comprehension dawned on Finn's face. "The baby," he repeated. "We are having a baby, in about 7 months if my calculations are correct," Fiona said. She was watching him carefully, as if uncertain of his reaction. Finn let out a whoop of joy that probably startled half the town, then swept Fiona up in his arms and spun her around. "We are having a baby," he said again, as if repetition would make the miracle more real. "Fiona, we are going to be parents. I take it you are happy about this?" Fiona asked, laughing. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Finn replied. He set her down carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile, then cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with all the love and joy he felt. "You are giving me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a purpose, a family. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." "Good," Fiona said, "because I love you just as much and I need you to be a little bit terrified. It keeps you from getting complacent." They spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, about the child who would arrive with the winter and the life they would build for that child. Finn found himself imagining a son or daughter growing up in the bakery, learning to knead dough and judge the heat of ovens, becoming part of the legacy Fiona had inherited from her mother and father. It was a different vision than he had held for his life just 2 years before, but it was infinitely richer. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Fiona continued to work in the bakery, though Finn and Henry both fussed over her and tried to take on the heavier tasks. She endured their concern with patient amusement, reminding them that she was pregnant, not incapacitated. But as autumn deepened and her belly grew, she did slow down, spending more time training their employees and less time at the ovens herself. Finn found himself preparing for fatherhood with the same intense focus he brought to everything. He read every book on child rearing he could find, consulted with the town doctor, and began building a cradle in the evenings after the bakery closed. Henry watched these preparations with a knowing smile and occasionally offered advice based on his own experience raising Fiona. "The most important thing," Henry said one evening as Finn worked on sanding the cradle smooth, "is to be present. Children do not need perfection. They need a father who shows up, who loves them and their mother, who does his best even when he is exhausted and uncertain. You already know how to do that. You have been doing it every morning for the past 2 years, showing up for Fiona before dawn. Just keep doing that for your child and you will be fine." The words settled something in Finn, eased a fear he had not fully acknowledged. He had no model for fatherhood, no memory of his own parents beyond vague impressions of warmth and loss. But he knew how to be steady. He knew how to show up, day after day, and put in the work required to build something lasting. And if that was enough, then perhaps he could do this after all. The baby arrived on a cold January night, nearly 2 years to the day after Finn and Fiona's wedding. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Finn paced the hallway outside their bedroom, listening to Fiona's cries and feeling utterly helpless. But when the doctor finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy daughter, and Finn was allowed into the room to see his wife and child, every moment of fear and worry evaporated. Fiona lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. When Finn approached, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a small, red-faced baby girl with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were still trying to focus on the strange new world around her. "Her name is Grace," Fiona said softly. "After my mother, if that is all right with you." "It is perfect," Finn whispered. He reached out to touch one impossibly small hand and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "She is perfect. She is ours," Fiona said, and there was wonder in her voice. Finn sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle them, and wrapped his arms around his wife and daughter. "I thought I had everything when I married you," he said. "I thought I knew what happiness felt like, but this, Fiona, this is beyond anything I imagined." "It is just the beginning," Fiona replied. "We have years ahead of us. Years of watching her grow, of building this life together. Years of early mornings and bread dough and everything we have created." "I cannot wait," Finn said honestly. The first months with Grace were a blur of sleepless nights and new routines. Finn learned to soothe a crying baby, to change diapers with one hand while managing bakery accounts with the other, to function on far less sleep than he would have thought possible. But he also experienced joys he had never anticipated. Grace's first smile directed at him, the way she would quiet when he held her, the fierce protectiveness that surged through him whenever he looked at her. The bakery adapted around their new family member. Fiona brought Grace downstairs in a basket during the early morning hours, keeping her close while they worked. The employees, all of whom had grown to care deeply for Finn and Fiona, took turns doting on the baby. Henry was a devoted grandfather, holding Grace for hours and singing her old songs he had sung to Fiona decades before. As winter gave way to spring, Finn found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed in just over 2 years. He had arrived in Hangtown as a rootless cowboy, owning nothing more than a horse and carrying no expectations beyond his next paycheck. Now he was a husband, a father, a business owner, and a valued member of a community. He had a purpose that extended beyond himself, responsibilities that grounded him in the best possible way. One morning in early April, as he stood in the bakery before dawn with Grace sleeping in his arms and Fiona pulling fresh loaves from the oven, Finn felt a sense of completion so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. This was what he had been searching for during all those years on the trail. Not freedom or adventure, but belonging. Not independence, but connection. Not the next horizon, but a place to call home. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked, noticing his expression as she set the loaves aside to cool. "About how I used to buy bread from you every morning," Finn said. "Back when I was just a cowboy looking for an excuse to see you. I never imagined that those mornings would lead to this, to us, to Grace, to everything we have built." Fiona moved to stand beside him, looking down at their sleeping daughter. "I never imagined it either," she admitted. "I had convinced myself that the bakery was all I would ever have, that love and family were things that happened to other people, and then you walked through the door and changed everything." "I am glad I did," Finn said. "So am I," Fiona replied. She leaned against him, and they stood together in the quiet bakery, surrounded by the scent of bread and the warmth of the ovens, holding the future they had created together. As the years passed, that future continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Grace grew from a baby into a curious toddler, and then into a bright child who loved helping in the bakery, almost as much as she loved the stories Finn told her about his days as a cowboy. She became the darling of Hangtown, spoiled by every customer who came through the bakery door and beloved by the staff who watched her grow. 2 years after Grace's birth, Fiona gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after Finn's father. Thomas was quieter than his sister, more contemplative, but equally loved. Watching his children grow, teaching them to knead dough and raid and ride horses, Finn experienced a contentment he had not known existed. The bakery continued to thrive, becoming an institution in Hangtown. Finn and Fiona's partnership deepened with each passing year, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. They weathered economic downturns and harsh winters, celebrated good years, and supported each other through difficult ones. They trained new employees, some of whom eventually went on to open their own bakeries in other towns, carrying forward the knowledge and techniques Fiona had learned from her mother. Henry Jackson lived to see his grandchildren grow, passing away peacefully in his sleep when Grace was 7 and Thomas was 5. His loss was deeply felt, but it was tempered by the knowledge that he had lived a good life and had seen his daughter happy, his legacy secure. The bakery continued in his memory, and Finn made sure that both children knew the stories of their grandfather, the man who had come to California seeking gold and had found something far more valuable in flour and yeast and the simple act of feeding people. When Grace turned 16, she surprised no one by announcing that she wanted to take over the bakery eventually. She had grown up in flour dust and rising dough, had learned the craft from her mother with the same dedication Fiona had learned from her grandmother. Finn and Fiona began training her in earnest, teaching her not just the baking but the business side, preparing her to inherit the legacy they had built. Thomas, meanwhile, showed an interest in ranching. He spent his summers working at the Morrison Ranch, which was now run by Samuel's son, and came home with stories about cattle and horses that reminded Finn of his own youth. Finn recognized his son's restlessness, the same pull toward open sky and physical work that had driven him for so many years. But Thomas's restlessness was different from what Finn's had been. Thomas was not running from anything. He simply had a different dream, and Finn and Fiona supported him in pursuing it. By the time Grace was 20 and Thomas was 18, Finn was in his early 40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines etched around his eyes. He and Fiona still woke before dawn most mornings, still worked in the bakery alongside their daughter and the staff they had trained. But they also took time now to rest, to enjoy the life they had built, to sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the Sierra Nevada foothills in shades of gold and crimson. One such evening, with the bakery closed and the children away visiting friends, Fiona turned to Finn and said, "Do you ever regret it, giving up the cowboy life for bread dough and early mornings?" Finn considered the question seriously. It was not the first time Fiona had asked some version of it over the years, and he knew she needed to hear the truth, not just reassurance. "No," he said finally. "I do not regret it. That life was necessary for me at the time. I needed to wander to figure out who I was and what I wanted. But once I found you, once I found this, the wandering was done. I got everything I needed right here." "Everything?" Fiona asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that made Finn turn to look at her directly. "Everything," he confirmed. "A wife I love more every year. Children who amaze me. Work that matters. A community that feels like family. Fiona, I have lived more life in these 20 years with you than I did in all the years before. I would not trade a single morning in that bakery for all the open range in the West." Fiona smiled, and Finn saw tears glistening in her eyes. "I am so glad you walked through my door that morning," she said softly. "So glad you kept coming back, day after day, buying more bread than any person could possibly need." "Best decision I ever made," Finn replied. He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "Though to be fair, it was not much of a decision. I saw you and I was done for. Everything after that was just details." They sat in comfortable silence, as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear overhead. Finn thought about the young man he had been when he first arrived in Hangtown, driven by nothing more than the need for work and the restless conviction that whatever he was looking for was somewhere else, always just beyond the next horizon. He thought about how wrong he had been, how the thing he needed was not out there in the distance but right here, in a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and bread, in the hands of a woman who saw him not as a drifter, but as someone worth building a life with. "Thank you," he said finally. "For what?" Fiona asked. "For seeing something in me worth keeping," Finn said. "For taking a chance on a cowboy who did not know the first thing about baking, for building this life with me." "You make it sound like I did you a favor," Fiona said. "But Finn, you saved me. I was so caught in routine, so convinced that the bakery was all I would ever have. You showed me that I could have more, that I deserved more. You gave me adventure and partnership and love, all without making me leave the thing I had built. How could I not take a chance on you?" They kissed then, in the gathering darkness, with the sounds of Hangtown settling in for the night around them. And Finn felt, as he had felt so many times over the past 2 decades, that he was exactly where he belonged. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of the bakery. Grace took over more and more of the daily operations, proving herself to be not just a skilled baker, but a natural leader and businesswoman. Thomas eventually bought a small ranch of his own just outside Hangtown, raising cattle and horses and frequently stopping by the bakery to share meals with his parents and sister. Both children married and started families of their own, giving Finn and Fiona the joy of grandchildren. As Finn entered his 50s, he found himself thinking more and more about legacy, about what would remain after he was gone. The bakery would continue, passing to Grace and eventually to her children if they wanted it. Thomas's ranch would support his family for generations if he managed it well. But beyond the businesses and the property, Finn hoped he was leaving something else. The knowledge that it was never too late to change direction, never too late to find the place where you belonged. He had been a cowboy, yes, but he had also been so much more. A husband, a father, a baker, a businessman, a member of a community. He had learned that identity was not fixed, that the person you were at 20 did not have to be the person you were at 50. He had learned that home was not a place you found but something you built, day by day, choice by choice, loaf by loaf. One evening, when Finn was 52 and Fiona was nearing 50, they closed the bakery early and walked to the small cemetery at the edge of town. They stood together at Henry Jackson's grave, and Finn thought about the man who had welcomed him into the family, who had taught him to bake and trusted him with his daughter's happiness. He would be proud, Finn said, of you, of the bakery, of everything we have built. He would be proud of you too, Fiona replied. He liked you from the start, you know, even before I was sure about you myself. He said you had steady eyes, that you looked at things directly instead of always planning your escape. He said that was the mark of a man who could commit. He was a wise man, Finn said. He was, Fiona agreed, and he was right about you. They stood in silence for a while, remembering. Then Fiona turned to Finn and said, "Do you remember that first morning, when you came into the bakery and I thought you were just another cowboy passing through?" "I remember," Finn said. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I remember the way you smiled at me and how I felt like I had been punched in the chest. I remember deciding right then that I would find a reason to come back the next day." "And you did," Fiona said, "every single day for months, until I could not imagine a morning without you there." "I still cannot," Finn admitted. "After all these years, waking up next to you and walking down to that bakery is still the best part of my day. Even better than the coffee." Fiona teased. "Even better than the coffee," Finn confirmed. They walked back to the bakery hand in hand, moving through the town they had made their home. Hangtown had changed over the decades, growing and evolving, but it still retained the character of the place Finn had first discovered all those years ago. The bakery still stood at the center of the community, still opened before dawn to feed the town, still carried the legacy of Henry Jackson and his daughter and the cowboy who had chosen bread over the open range. That night, lying in bed with Fiona curled against his side, Finn found himself reflecting on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. If someone had told him, back when he was a young cowboy driving cattle across Montana, that he would end up in a California mining town baking bread for a living, he would have laughed at the absurdity of it. But life had a way of surprising you, of leading you places you never expected to go. He thought about all the mornings he had ridden into Hangtown, ostensibly for bread but really for the chance to see Fiona, to hear her voice and earn her smile. He thought about the day he had finally worked up the courage to tell her how he felt, and the relief and joy when she had admitted she felt the same. He thought about their wedding, about the birth of their children, about every triumph and challenge they had faced together. And he thought about the question Fiona had asked, did he ever regret giving up the cowboy life? The answer was still no, would always be no, because he had not given anything up. He had traded one kind of life for another, better one. He had exchanged solitude for partnership, drifting for purpose, empty horizons for the deep satisfaction of building something that mattered. The next morning, Finn woke before dawn as he had for decades. He dressed quietly, trying not to disturb Fiona, but she stirred anyway and reached for him. "Morning already," she mumbled. "Afraid so," Finn said. "Bread does not bake itself." "Neither do handsome cowboys turn themselves into bakers," Fiona replied, more awake now. "And yet here we are." "Here we are," Finn agreed. They went downstairs together, moving through the familiar routine of lighting the ovens and preparing the dough. Grace arrived shortly after, yawning but cheerful, and the three of them worked in comfortable coordination. As the first loaves went into the oven, and the scent of baking bread began to fill the air, Finn looked at his wife and daughter and felt the same sense of rightness he had felt that first morning, standing in this bakery and realizing that his wandering days were done. This was his life now. These early mornings, this warm building, these people he loved. The work of his hands feeding the community, the rhythm of the seasons marking time, the deep satisfaction of having built something lasting. He was no longer the cowboy who bought bread each dawn. He was the baker, the husband, the father, the grandfather. He was Finn Everett, who had found his home in Hangtown and never looked back. The sun rose over the Sierra Nevada, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Finn opened the bakery doors to greet the first customers of the day. The miners and ranchers and shopkeepers filed in, collecting their bread and exchanging pleasantries, and Finn greeted each one with genuine warmth. These were his people now. This was his town. This was the life he had chosen, and he would not have changed a single moment of it. By the time he was in his 60s, Finn had fully retired from the daily operations of the bakery, leaving it in Grace's capable hands. He and Fiona spent their days in quieter pursuits, tending a small garden behind the bakery, reading together in the evenings, visiting with their growing collection of grandchildren. Thomas's ranch had become successful enough that he employed several hands of his own, and Finn enjoyed spending time there, teaching his grandsons to ride and sharing stories about his own days as a cowboy. "Did you ever shoot anyone, Grandpa?" one of Thomas's boys asked him one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch of Thomas's ranch house, watching the cattle graze in the distance. "No," Finn said honestly. "I was lucky enough to avoid that kind of trouble. The West was not quite as wild as the stories make it sound. Mostly it was just hard work and long days and trying to keep the cattle from wandering off." "But you were a real cowboy," the boy pressed. "You rode horses and everything." "I did," Finn confirmed, "for many years. But then I met your grandmother and I decided I would rather bake bread than herd cattle, and I have never regretted that choice." "Why?" the boy asked, genuinely curious. Was not being a cowboy more exciting? Finn thought about how to answer. "Being a cowboy was exciting sometimes," he admitted. "But it was also lonely. I spent most of my time by myself or with men I barely knew, always moving, never settling down. When I met your grandmother, I realized that excitement was not what I wanted anymore. I wanted a home. I wanted family. I wanted to build something that would last, and I got all of that." The boy seemed to think this over. "So you were happy giving up being a cowboy?" "I did not give it up," Finn said. "I just became something more. I am still the same person I was then. But now I am also a husband, a father, a grandfather, a baker. Being a cowboy was just one part of my life, not the whole thing. And honestly, the parts that came after have been much better." As Finn approached his 70th year, his health remained good, though he moved more slowly now and tired more easily. Fiona, 2 years younger, was still sharp and active, though her hair had gone completely white and her hands bore the scars of a lifetime of working with hot ovens. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a party that seemed to include the entire town. And Finn was amazed to realize that he had spent more than half his life with this woman, and still loved her as deeply as he had that first morning when she smiled at him across a bakery counter. 50 years, Fiona said as they danced slowly to fiddle music in the town hall. Can you believe it? Barely, Finn admitted. It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. You know what the best part is? Fiona asked. What? I would do it all again, she said. Every morning, every challenge, every moment. If I had the choice, I would choose you again every single time. Same here, Finn said, his voice rough with emotion. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Fiona Jackson, or Everett, I suppose. Though you will always be Fiona Jackson in my head, the baker's daughter who took a chance on a drifting cowboy. And you will always be the cowboy who bought bread every dawn, Fiona replied. Until winter, when you asked for my hand and a share of the bakery. Best business decision I ever made. They laughed together, and Finn held his wife close, grateful beyond words for every dawn they had shared, for every loaf of bread they had baked together, for the life they had built from flour and faith, and the decision to take a chance on love. When Finn passed away in his sleep at the age of 73, it was peaceful and at home with Fiona at his side. He had lived a full life, rich with love and purpose, and he had no regrets. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of California, testament to the impact he and Fiona had made on their community. Grace and Thomas spoke about their father, about his kindness and steadiness, about the way he had loved their mother and taught them by example what a good marriage looked like. Fiona grieved deeply, as anyone would after losing their partner of 51 years. But she also took comfort in knowing that Finn had been happy, that he had lived the life he wanted and died knowing he was loved. She continued to live above the bakery, watching her grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow, secure in the knowledge that the legacy she and Finn had built would continue long after both of them were gone. The bakery still bore the Jackson name, though it could just as easily have been called Jackson Everett to honor both the woman who had built it and the man who had helped expand it. Grace ran it with the same dedication her mother had shown, and passed it eventually to her own daughter, who showed every sign of carrying the tradition forward into yet another generation. And sometimes, when the bakery opened before dawn and the first loaves went into the ovens, Grace would tell the story of her father to whoever would listen. She would talk about the cowboy who had walked through the door one spring morning in 1878, ostensibly for bread, but really for the chance to see the woman behind the counter. She would talk about how he kept coming back, day after day, until winter arrived and he finally asked for her mother's hand and a partnership in the bakery. She would talk about the love they had built, the life they had shared, the way they had proven that it was never too late to change direction, never too late to find where you belonged. The story became part of Hangtown's mythology, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. The cowboy and the baker, the man who traded his horse for a rolling pin and never looked back. It was a love story, yes, but it was also more than that. It was a story about home and purpose, about the courage it took to choose connection over freedom, about the deep satisfaction that came from building something lasting with someone you loved. And every morning, when the bakery opened its doors and the scent of fresh bread filled Hangtown streets, it was a living testament to that story, to Finn and Fiona and the life they had built together. The bread that fed the town was more than just sustenance. It was proof that love could transform a person, that the choices we make matter, that a life well lived leaves echoes that resonate long after we are gone. Finn Everett had come to Hangtown as a cowboy looking for work. He had found bread and love, and a home that lasted not just his lifetime but generations beyond. And in the end, that was the greatest success any person could hope for. To love deeply, to build something meaningful, to leave the world better than you found it, one loaf of fresh bread at a time.